So now we're into part 3. Now we're going to add in our darkest values. Here is my crazy entish looking tree. So we can see now that we need a little bit more of a darker value. You might want to start sparingly. Sometimes when you start with a dark value, it's a little bit unnerving to put into the tree part. The basic idea of the different values with the tree is that there's going to be some parts that are lighter that are going to look like they're either closer to us or they're getting more of the light hitting from it. So now I'm going to pick one of my darker values. I could go with a dark blue, a dark purple, a dark red. For this one, I'm going to go with a dark purple. What I did is getting a lighter version of the purple here and a more concentrated version right there. Because green and purple, they're going to lay over and make a pretty decent dark color. So if I want to start a little sparingly, if I'm not sure what's going to happen here, some of you guys may still be unsure of your layering. You can see with just a little bit of that purple, I'm creating a much darker value. And because the part underneath it was not 100% solid, the same color, there's a little bit of variety. It's a little bit darker, it's a little bit lighter. I can also come in with a little bit of that darker version of the purple and drop that in to get a little bit of a mix of the dark to the lighter. Remember, that whole part is a little bit wet right now, so it will spread, but you can already see how now that part looks like it's behind. Find a few places. Maybe you go over an area that's already the secondary, like middle range. So the idea with layering is I can take this purple and put it on top of a green and get a darker version. I can put this purple over part of this yellow. I can take just a little bit of it. I can drop it over the green, my lighter value. So I can take my dark value and I can make it over a light value and keep it light. I can make a medium dark value with it. I can make a darker value or much darker. Layering gives you lots of different options because there's so much variety of values that are already going on. The darker values, remember, are the parts that look like that part of the tree is going backwards. So if there's a group of leaves right here that are kind of coming forward at me, that part's going to come forward, and then the part around it's going to kind of go backwards. Just a little bit of the darker value can go a long way. So your dark value you're going to use for both that, and you might be using it for some detail or dry brush effect. So let's talk about the tree trunk right now. Right now, it's definitely got like one side darker and one side lighter. If I want to show that this is darker up here because it's underneath the tree, then I definitely want to layer over some of this darker purple. I can either do a little bit like that, or I can get my full strength and get it much, much darker. Since I have this here, I definitely need to think consistency. So I need to make sure I have some of that same darker color underneath here. Remember, this is a tree. It's supposed to be jagged and rough and not perfect. Things should be, you know, kind of wobbly. Let's talk about dry brush. Say I wanted to add in some of the details, like the crevices in the tree trunk, show that there's some ins and outs to the tree trunk. If I try and do this right now, remember this is wet. Very big mistake and pretty common in beginning painting. If I try and do my crevices now and do some of those details, see how they soften. They're not crisp at all. A lot of times on projects, when you're learning, you end up with details that are like this, where they're a little bit fuzzy on the edges. You need to make sure you're patient, make sure your paper is dry, so you can get those really sharp details. You cannot do dry brush, you cannot do details while the paper is wet. So say down here, this is dry, I can add in those details as small or thick as I want to. But the reality is, I still need a little bit more of a shadow on this side. So you can't do your details until you finish everything else. Once again, I'm gonna do a little bit more of this. I'm gonna let it dry, and then we'll come back and we'll do a little bit of dry brush. So now you can see how our tree is coming along. It has some depth and some layering. It's definitely more interesting than our coloring book. Plain green, plain brown trunk. This part's still a little bit damp, so I'm going to show you on this side. But if there's any little details and crevices, Make sure your paper is 100% dry. So I have half of the tree trunk here that's still a little bit dry. Like we showed you before, if you put it on here, it's going to spread and be a softer effect. So if you want a soft spreading line, that's great. I'm barely touching my tip of my brush. My brush is mostly dry, and then I loaded it up with paint, so there's not a lot of water on my brush. So if I need to kind of come in here and get my character's mouth a little bit, I can. Had some eyebrows going on him. So now I can do all those little details because it's dry. If I try and do it over here, right now the paper is cool to the touch, it's not wet. So remember, as it's drying, it's going to spread the most when it's wet. But you can see when I add in some of these crevices, for the most part, they're staying put because it's mostly dry. But they are going to be a little bit softer because as it settles, they're going to get a little bit more soft in there, depending on how wet it is here. But now I can add a little bit of, the cracks and crevices in here, all the way up to the kind of fingers, and emphasize those a little bit. All right. So it's kind of our 4-step approach. I told you it was going to be 3, but it's really 4. Okay, so first, do your drawing. Then you're going to start with your yellow and drop in a secondary color that's also light. Let it dry. Take a picture. Then drop in some medium splotches wherever you want it to look like it's kind of behind. Then let it dry. Take another picture. And then come in and do your darker value splotches. Let it dry. Take a picture. And then if you're going to do any dry brush, that's got to happen at the end after everything else is done. All right, that's it. Go to it.